in Linguistics from the University of California, Santa Cruz in 1996. His research is in the overlapping domains of descriptive linguistics and theoretical syntax. His recent work has been on clause structure in Austronesian languages, particularly Malagasy, the native language of Madagascar. He teaches core courses in the linguistics department as well as upper-level courses in syntactic theory. He received a class teaching award in 2006 and 2007. So this is someone who volunteered to come and do this for you, so please give him a hand and welcome him.
Thank you all for coming. It's a huge crowd. They were probably more surprised than I was. I want to say two things. First of all, I want to briefly tell you what a program officer does so you know what my sort of credentials are in this domain. In a nutshell, program officers are the people who administer the proposals when they come in. So they take them from their initial coming in to their evaluation to their award or decline. So I've been at NSF for 2 years, so I have a pretty good sense of what the process is, at least in my directorate. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about is that what I'm saying is aimed towards the directorate of the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. I understand when they sent the message out that there was a mention of other sciences on the email. So I'm going to be specifically talking about these sciences, but if you're in the other sciences, a lot of what I say will be useful as well. So let me just get a sense. How many people here aren't from these sciences? That is, how many people are from engineering or math or chemistry or physics or something like that? Okay, so a good handful of you. So I won't be specifically talking about those programs. I honestly don't even know whether they have the doctoral dissertation award, so you'll need to check on that. If they do, most of what I say will probably be relevant, okay? Yeah, there we go. That's what I wanted. Okay. All right, so that's who I am, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And let me just give you an overview of the three things I want to touch on today. One is I want to give you just a little bit of information about the National Science Foundation, because if you go on to have an academic career, hopefully you'll be interfacing with it. And so to have a basic idea of what the organization is a good thing. Then when I share my talk, I'm going to give you an idea of what's involved in writing and submitting a proposal for a doctoral dissertation research improvement grant, which I will often abbreviate as vested as DDIG, DDIG, DDRIG, DDRIG, something like that. If you hear something that starts with a D, I'm talking about this doctoral dissertation research improvement grant, which I don't want to have to use. And then lastly, I'll finish up talking a little bit about the review process. That is, after you submit your proposal, what happens to it and what do you expect? Okay? All right, so to start off about NSF, NSF is an independent agency of the executive branch of the U.S. government. So it's down there in the corner. It's on par with NASA, the EPA, the Smithsonian, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Okay? And it's a fairly flat structure, so it's pretty well near the president in terms of the hierarchy. Okay? So that's where the NSF is. The NSF is divided up into directorates, and SBE, the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, is one directorate. That's the one I'm in. When I ask what other fields people were in, they will be probably under these other directorates, such as engineering, or MPS, math and physical sciences, or geosciences. Okay. So in that case, if it looks like your field is under one of those other directorates, what you need to do is go to the website of NSF for that directorate and then your program, and find out whether they have these DDIGs. Okay, because not all programs and directorates do. All right, but if they do, then you're golden. A lot of what I say is going to be pretty much the same. Okay, but again, I'm going to be focusing on the social, behavioral, and economic.
Those people who didn't have handouts, Marco, where are they now?
I've handed out all the extra ones.
Okay. Are there still people without handouts? We need another 10.
Okay, does someone want to get theirs out?
That's just available on the web.
Yes, it's already posted on my site, and I'll show everyone where it is.
All right. So
You can keep them.
if you you want to take notes, and then you can, I wanted to make the slides available, and I'll try not to say too much that's not on here so that you have to take some stuff written down. So within these directorates, the directorates are divided up into divisions, and then the divisions are divided up into programs. The programs more or less correspond to what we think of as traditional fields. So within SBE, there are basically two divisions that we care about. One is behavioral and cognitive sciences, and the other is social and economic sciences. And I've listed the programs under each of those divisions that exist. And so behavioral and cognitive sciences is things like archaeology, and the anthropologies, cultural and physical, social psychology, perception, action, and cognition, that's like psychology, linguistics, geography, and so on. And then SES, social and economic sciences, that's things like economics, obviously, but also a number of other things that have slightly unusual titles like law and social sciences, methodology, measurement, and statistics, innovation and organizational sciences. And then there's this one, science, technology, and society, which, talking to Donna, maybe what some people thought indicated that we were going to talk about all the other time. So those are the programs. Again, those are more like fields or departments within the division, and that's in the directory. Now, not all of these programs offer DDIGs, which is why I suggested that you actually check that your closest field offers it. Because if they don't, unfortunately, there isn't much you can do. So it's on a program-by-program basis whether or not the DDIG is okay? And so here, in a nutshell, is what the goal of NSF is, and it's to advance discovery, innovation, and education beyond the frontiers of current knowledge and empower future generations of science and engineering. So it's a fairly broad goal, but it's basically to make science happen. Okay. Another way to think about it is that NSF is a science management agency. So unlike some of the other programs that were parallel to NSF, like NASA or the EPA, NSF doesn't do science. It enables science or facilitates science. Okay. Unfortunately, in my job as a program officer, I don't get to do science. I make it so that other people can do science, which is rewarding, but if you're a scientist, it's not as fun. So that's another reason why I'm only doing it for 2 years. I want to go back and do science. All right, so to keep an eye in the back of your mind, how much science NSF is facilitating here, I'll give you some figures on the number of proposals that come in and how they evaluate them. So NSF gets on the order of 50,000 proposals a year. Okay, that's a lot. Right? And for each of those proposals, there may be roughly 5 reviews each, so that's 250,000 reviews a year. Right? So they're asking all these people to evaluate all this science. So there's a lot going on, and that's why there's so many program officers, and why NSF is such a large agency. Of those awards, roughly 10,000 new awards a year. And that's over all kinds of things. That's over research awards, that's over doctoral dissertation awards, that's over large-scale instrumentation awards. So it's not to say that 1 in 5 gets funded is not really a good figure. But that's, if you want a ballpark, that's roughly the funding rate, 20%. And the budget for NSF is roughly $7 billion. So a lot of money and a lot of science being evaluated. The doctoral dissertation research improvement grants specifically are for these purposes. They're intended to improve the quality of dissertation research. Okay? So the funds are used for things you wouldn't normally get from your university to allow you to make science happen. Okay? At the beginning level of the dissertation. Okay? And the dissertation proposals are judged on the basis of scientific merit. They're not judged on the basis of need. So they're judged on the same criteria that NSF uses to judge all of its other proposals. Regular research proposals, large scale, interdisciplinary, instrumentation proposals. The same criteria that those reviewers use on the major awards, they use on these awards as well. So it's putting in a DDIG, even if you ultimately don't get one, is good experience if you're ultimately going to interface with the NSF system again. It gives you a good sense of how the system runs because you're basically engaging it in the same way as regular research.
What are the typical items that folks are asking for, not available to the university?
I'll get to that. So if I don't cover it, when I get to that, if I don't cover what you're wondering about, ask me. Okay? That's a good thing. Please interrupt me at any time you have questions. Okay? Hopefully we'll still get through everything, but if you have questions that are relevant to what I'm showing, definitely please stop me and we'll answer the questions then. Okay. All right, so before I talk about the details of how to actually write a proposal and submit it, here's some good places for more information. And again, this is SBE specific. So SBE has its own DDIG website, and that's the first link. The second link is the actual solicitation. That's the call for proposals. That tells you what all the deadlines are, what the eligibility criteria are, what you can use the money for, how to apply, and so on. Okay, so if you have any questions that are sort of a mechanical nature, the solicitation is the place to go. Then there's the grant proposal guide, which is the more general guide that NSF puts out that describes the format of grants that come into, proposals that come into NSF, what they should include. Okay, so if you have any questions about formatting, what you should include, what you shouldn't include, and so on, the grant proposal guide is the place to go, in addition to the more particular solicitation. And then the last one, particularly for SBE, is that there's a list of the individual programs that do give the doctoral dissertation improvement grants, and a link to the various places for those programs. Okay. As I said, not all the programs give them, so the ones that do are on this site, and it gives you the people to contact, the program-specific links, if there are program-specific websites, and any other information to throw. And actually, I put in the picture just so you have an idea of what it looks like. So this is that last link right here. This is the individual program website. And you can see it continues on, but it lists the programs that do have these DDIGs, and then it gives you the link to the program itself, the people to contact, and so on. So that's the first place to start, because as I'll say a number of times as I go on, each program has slightly different requirements and restrictions and guidelines. So what you're going to want to do at some point early on is find out which program you're targeting and then determine what their restrictions are. Okay. For example, different programs have different budget restrictions. So you don't want to be asking for a budget that's twice as large as what your particular program allows. All right, so that's the NSF, and that's where to go to get started. Now let me talk about how to actually put the proposal together and submit it. And there are two things that everybody tells me when I ask them, well, what do you tell people when they're going to write a dissertation grant? And they tell me two things. They tell me you have to start with a good idea. And the reason behind this is that evaluators or reviewers are remarkably lenient if they can get excited about something. They'll let the little stuff slide if they can really get excited about the science. So take some time and think about an interesting project. You've probably already done this. This is your dissertation, but take some extra time and make sure this is something that is going to interest people and excite them. The other advice that people always give when you're writing one of these things is it takes way more time to write a grant proposal than you can imagine. Okay? Having done this, I know it's not something you throw together over the weekend like a 10-page paper that you used to do. I would say at the very least a month, and other people would probably say more like 3 months. Okay? If you already have, say, a dissertation prospectus or a proposal, then you're in much better shape. But it's amazing how long it can take to organize your thoughts, think about what you're going to do, and get it to the point where it's clear enough and specific enough that it's going to be a competitive proposal. Okay, so leave yourself plenty of time and come up with that one good idea. You only have to have one good idea, right? In your entire career, if you just have one good idea, then you're doing pretty well. But those are the two important things. Okay? And then what you have to do is develop this idea and then find the place in NSF to target it. Okay? And then lastly, once you've developed the idea, found the appropriate program, then you submit the proposal on what's called Fastlane, which is NSF's web-based proposal submission website. Okay, this is where all this goes on. Yes?
Excuse me, do you have to have institutional review board approval before you at this early stage?
No.
Oh, you don't?
No. No. I'll hit IRB again at some point, and if I don't say what you'd like to hear, ask me again. Okay? So that's the getting started. All right, so let me talk about each of these steps in turn, and then I'll spend most of the time showing you. I'm going to actually walk you through the submission of a proposal and show you all the pieces that you need, and that's where I'll talk about the individual pieces like budget and IRB and everything else. Okay? All right, so how do you develop your idea? Well, the first one is to figure out what kind of research you're doing. What is your research question or hypothesis? Okay, it's great to go out and collect data and see all the things that, say, we do in the psychological sciences or engineering. But for a competitive proposal, you need to start with a research question or a hypothesis that you're going to test. Okay, then think about how are you going to answer this. All right, and then lastly, you want to think about why is this important? Why should anybody care? There are lots of hypotheses out there that are testable, right? But they may not be interesting, and they may not be something that the government really wants to put its money towards. Okay, so this goes back to the find an interesting question. All right, so that's the first thing, ask an interesting question. And then make sure it's original and exciting. Okay, so do a literature search, talk to other people. If you start talking to your colleagues about your idea and they want to change the subject, that might be a hint that you need to look elsewhere. Okay? If you're interested in it, great, that can compensate for a lot. You have enthusiasm for the topic. That's a good sign. But do a literature search as well and make sure that either it hasn't been done or you don't want it to have been done and didn't lead anywhere. Okay, so that's the second piece. And then lastly, after you've asked the right questions and made sure that it's an interesting question, decide how you're going to go about addressing the question or testing the hypothesis. Okay. So ideally, you have some preliminary data that shows that the hypothesis is promising. Okay. You have a plan that shows you can actually answer the question. Okay. It doesn't require going to Antarctica for 6 years that the NSF isn't going to pay for or anybody else, that you can do in a time frame of a dissertation. Okay, and then lastly, determine what your needs are, that they're also realistic. Okay, if you need a telescope that isn't up and running yet, then you're going to be in trouble as well. Okay, so once you've got the question and you've made sure it's something you want to pursue, make sure you can actually implement the project in a reasonable space. All right. Once you've done that, the next thing to do is to interface your research with NSF. And what you need to do is find the right program to apply to. And I'll talk a little bit later that you can actually apply to more than one program, but for now assume that you're going to apply to one. So again, go back to the contact list that I showed you and see if your traditional field is on that list. Okay, if it is, then great. If it's not, see if one of the other programs might have an interest in what you're doing. Or see if you could spin the proposal slightly to make it of interest to them. Okay, particularly a number of the proposals in SES are sort of multidisciplinary. You might not find your exact field, but you might find something that interferes. So that's worth a shot if you don't see your field right away. Okay? And then do your homework. So read the solicitations that I gave you, the grant proposal guide. Read the website for the program that you're interested in. And again, double check that what you're doing matches up with what their interests are. Okay? Because for better or for worse, NSF is a little bit like a university. It's made up of department-like things. And you want to be able to target your research to one of these places and make the match be good. Okay, you don't want to have what is oftentimes called falling through the cracks. That is, you don't want to have an interesting project that nobody is really interested in because it doesn't really fit into one of the programs. It happens occasionally, but when you submit your project, you want to try and inform it. Okay. And then if you have any questions about whether your research is appropriate for the program that you targeted, just write to the program officer. Okay, and say, here's a one-page summary of my research. Is this the kind of thing you all would fund? And if they say no, almost always they will shop your proposal around in NSF and try and find you someplace that will fund this kind of work. Okay, so if you have any doubts about the suitability of your research for a particular program, put it in the system and let them give you some ideas of who else might fund it. NSF is a huge place, and I don't even pretend to know everything that goes on there. But if I know something isn't linguistics, I'll look around and see where else it might fit. Because there's lots of other stuff, really interesting stuff going on in NSF. So that's a good thing. Okay. All right. So you've got an idea, you laid it out in general terms as to what you can do for a dissertation. So here's what the proposal actually has to contain. Okay, there are a bunch of pieces. The pieces that require the most work and the most thought are the three that I boldfaced here: the project summary, the project description, and the budget. And all of this, all those three and all the rest of it are loaded into the FastLane system. So what I'm going to do now is walk you through the FastLane submission process, and I'll hit on these various things, and I'll spend maybe the lion's share of the time talking about this. So if you have any questions about any of these, or those in particular, let me know when we get stopped.
Marco, I think the people in the front, if you didn't
Did
get
you all get
handouts,
handouts?
okay,
Other people done.
we've got handouts coming. And we need one over here too. Thank you, sorry.
Anybody else need handouts? Back there? Any other extras? No? Sorry. Behind you, there's somebody in the back row. All right. So now we're at the point where we're going to write a proposal and submit it. Okay, so Fastlane is the NSF system, like I said, where you do this, and you'll need a login, password, and ID, and eventually you'll get to this point in the Fastlane system. So this is what Fastlane looks like, and there'll be a link for proposal preparation. Yes.
So with the DDIG, your chair submits it though. So are we able to log in on local cards? Because from what I've read
Yeah.
through it, your chair is the actual PI.
So no, I have actually never submitted one, so you don't even get access to Fastlane?
Well, I guess I'm asking if we should register for Fastlane, because with the DDRIG, your chair actually submits it.
That part
as
is
your
correct,
PI. Yeah.
but your chair shouldn't be writing the proposal. You
No,
should-
but that's what I'm wondering, like at what point?
That's-
Does the student ever interface with this, or do we give the full packet?
You're gonna start with your professor. The first thing you're gonna do is, after you have your idea, you're gonna select a professor.
No, I've
Right,
already
right.
done that. I mean, for me personally, I've been working on the
Yeah.
grant for a good while,
Your
but
question
I'm
is who actually
excited that we all
does,
have this
who actually
presentation.
submits the,
But I'm curious about the actual submission, because when I read the NSF handbook and I read all the requirements, your
So
chair
You
has
can
to be one that
register,
submits.
you call DSR, and you can speak to Judy Harris, and they will sign you up for Fastlane, so they'll register you. And then you'll have access to get in to work on the proposal, and so will the professor. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah?
So you just call Judy Harris, I don't have the phone number, but it's DSR, Division of Sponsored Research.
So she's a UF?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome.
And you just call and they will register you. It's in sponsored research.
Or it would be a separate person grad, because we're the.
No, you just call there and ask for Judy Harris. And if she's not available, you can say, I need to register Fastlane, and they'll know exactly what to do.
Awesome, thanks.
yeah, I would recommend that you all do this yourselves. I mean, you can go, you certainly want to be interacting with your advisor, but in terms of submitting things, cut out the middleman and do it yourself.
You can't.
You can't.
NSF requires for the DDRIG, your
First.
chair must submit it.
Submit it, but you
They
can.
are the PI. Yeah.
Right, correct, but as Beth was saying, you can upload this.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So
That was my question,
yeah,
was can you, because
You,
technically
right,
they
you
have-
can't submit it, I mean, your chair doesn't even submit it, the DSR does, but I would suggest that you all do the actual uploading and stuff, if you're writing the documents. And to have your advisor check before you press the final button. All right, so once you hit proposal preparation, it goes through a couple more screens, and you get to this. And this is the list of all the things, all the pieces in the grant proposal. It's the Fastlane version of that list I just showed you previously. Okay, so what I'm going to do is talk you through each of the ones that are relevant. Some of them are freebies, and some of them aren't interesting. But I'll talk about the ones that are interesting. Okay. So the first one is the cover page. And there are a couple things on the cover page that are worth pointing out. One is the program announcement. So if you're applying for the SBE DDIG, then this is the announcement. Okay, there'll be a drop-down menu where you can pick the announcement. If you're in another directorate, it's going to be a different one. Okay, but that's the SBE program. The other thing on the cover page is the NSF unit that you want to consider your proposal. Okay, so for me, I wouldn't submit to the same distance. So if you hit NSF unit for consideration, you get a screen like this. And what it asks you to do is pick one or more programs to submit this thing to. So there are basically four things you have to do. First of all, you pick a division. Okay, so remember I said within SBE there are two divisions. So for some reason they ask you to know which division your program is in. So I happen to know linguistics is in BCS. So I pick BCS and then I hit select division. Then I get to this menu which will let me pick a program. Okay, and I'll pick linguistics. and then I hit select program. Okay, and it will, in this box down here, put in BCS linguistics. All right? If you're applying to somewhere else, you pick one of the other ones. You'll only get the programs in here that actually have DDIGs. So if you're in a department that doesn't offer DDIGs, then you're going to not see what you want in there, and then you're going to know that you need to look up. The interesting thing about this screen that I wanted to point out is this business down here. If you've selected more than one unit, blah, blah, blah. So what that means is you can, in fact, select more than one unit. You can do what's called co-review. You can ask for more than one program or unit to evaluate your proposal. And as I said, having more than one program evaluate your proposal is what's called co-review. Okay, so you don't submit two separate proposals to two separate programs. You submit one proposal and ask that it be reviewed or evaluated by more than one program. Okay? Yes?
Can you actually submit two separate proposals, though, to two separate areas?
The system won't stop you, I don't think, but it's a bad thing to do.
So it's not feasible to
No,
have
no.
two separate dissertation improvement
If it's the
grants?
same proposal.
No, if it's a different proposal.
Oh, if it's a different proposal, yeah, that's okay. But unless you're writing two dissertations, I'm not sure why you would.
I feel like I am, actually.
No, let's say because some of the deadlines are months apart. So
Right.
let's say you submit one that's due in August
Mhm.
and focus it specific for that directorate,
Yeah.
you know, but that it's not selected. Would it be inappropriate to take all the really good reviewer comments and refocus it into maybe a more appropriate directorate and resubmit it
Absolutely, yeah.
at a later time?
At a later time,
Okay.
right? But that's not a simultaneous submission,
Right.
that's a sequential.
But if you wanted, let's say, like, I could do at the same time submit to two areas, even if they have like 3 months apart where they review.
Yeah, it's, the timing issue is not great, but what you have to do basically is submit to the earlier one,
Mhm.
and they will coordinate internally to get it reviewed by them. Okay?
Cool.
So you have to just, trust NSF will deal. If you ask for review by two programs and both programs agree to review it, then they'll work out the details. You might have to wait longer because you'll have to wait till the second deadline, but it'll get done. Okay? All right, so this is what, like I said, this is what's called co-review, and it's basically putting your proposal out there for two disciplines. Maybe it's interdisciplinary and it's appropriate for two. Linguistics does a fair amount of reviewing with cultural anthropology, so a lot of our proposals go to both places. And I like to think of co-reviewing as giving your proposal two chances to be liked. Okay? If you're a pessimist, you might say, well, I'll give you two chances to be disliked, but in fact, it generally works in the other direction, it works to your favor. Okay, so if you have a proposal or a project that's interdisciplinary, look and see if there's more than one program that might be relevant for you. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay, so that's the unit. And then the remainder of the cover sheet, let me talk about selected things. The rest of the cover sheet has a lot of stuff in it, and most of them aren't interesting. There are a few that I want to point out. One is that the title of your project should be Doctoral Dissertation Research Colon and blah, blah, blah. All the individual program pages will tell you this, though. You'll see this again, but that's worth pointing. Programs are specific about duration. Some only allow DDIGs that are 12 months, some allow 24 months. So again, this is where you need to look at your program-specific page and see what restrictions are. The PI and co-PI. PI is the principal investigator, co-PI is the co-principal investigator. On the DDIGs, your advisor, as he was saying, your advisor is the principal investigator. You are the co-principal investigator. Okay, so your advisor is the one who actually has to submit the proposal, but you're listed on the proposal as the co-PI. And in terms, as far as the NSF is concerned, the PI and the co-PI share equal responsibility for the grant. Okay, so if there are reports that have to be turned in, you both share the blame if they don't come in. Okay, it's not that they're just going to seek out the PI. Okay, you both are required to meet the grant requirement. Okay. In terms of the PI and co-PI, just a quick note, there are no citizenship requirements here. The grants are made to the institutions, not to the individuals, so you don't have to be a U.S. citizen to apply for a DDIG. And so if you know somebody who didn't come because they thought they weren't eligible, then you tell them the good news they are, and they can apply.
So you say that we are filling out all of these forms, and both my advisor and I have one of these accounts through Fastlane. But as long as I upload all of the information, does he have to do anything beyond, I mean, what exactly is?
Technically, he doesn't have to do it.
Okay.
When you get to the end of the process, there's a button that says submit to SRO, which is the Sponsored Research Office. And then they actually submit it to NSF. But if you want to bypass your advisor, you can. I think that button will be available to you. That's what sends it off into the world. Okay? And then the last thing on the cover page that's relevant is human subjects information. So this is the question about IRB approval. Okay, there is a place on the cover page to indicate whether you have approval, whether it's pending, or whether it's required and you'll get it down the road. Okay, so fill in the information that's relevant. If you have it, great. Chances are you won't have it. Say that you've applied for it if that's appropriate. Keep in mind, though, it can take a lot of time to get IRB approval. Okay, so even if you plan to apply, put it in. You don't want to be told you're going to get an award and then you're sitting around for 4 months waiting for IRB approval. So just remember that this is something that takes time. It's what usually holds up most awards, waiting for the IRB board the IR board to meet and approve the budget. Okay, so that's it for the cover page. The next one is the project summary. The project summary is a one-page document that summarizes the research. Okay? And it may be all that some people like the program officers read, so it should be accessible. All right, you don't want to overload it with terminology and technical details that the program officer can't get past. It's a one-page summary that describes the research. And it should have 3 paragraphs in it. Okay? This is not something that NSF requires, this is something that I'm strongly suggesting. This is an organization for the project summary that will make it absolutely transparent and will avoid any kind of misunderstandings or confusion about what's in it. Okay? It should have 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph should be the proposed research. Okay? The second paragraph should say intellectual merit, just like I've done there, and then what the intellectual merit of the proposal is. And then there should be a third paragraph that says broader impacts, and then the discussion of broader impacts. NSF actually requires those last 2 paragraphs, although they don't necessarily tell you to label them in such a transparent way. I'm telling you to label them that way because if it's not sufficiently obvious that you have those things, it can actually be, your proposal can actually be sent back to you, which would be a huge bummer. Okay, so if you label them that way, nobody has to even read the project summary to see that you've addressed these 2 things. So like I say here, the project summary must address both the intellectual merit and the broader impacts of the research. And that's not me talking, that's NSF talking. And the implication beyond that, like I said, is they can send your proposal back if it doesn't have those. Okay, so no point in playing around with that. Just include those in your project summary. Let me talk about these 2 things, intellectual merit and broader impacts. They're what are called the NSF review criteria. So when your proposal gets sent out to be reviewed, these are the 2 criteria that the reviewers are asked to use to evaluate your proposal. Intellectual merit. To what extent does your proposal have the following things? Okay? Advancement of knowledge and understanding, either within your field or across fields. Okay? To what extent does it explore creative, original, or potentially transformative ideas? Okay, so this goes back to what I said about have a good idea to start off. Because if you start off with a good idea that people are excited about, then you've got this intellectual merit criteria down. To what extent does it have well-conceived and organized activity? Okay, so how well have you convinced the reviewers that you've got a plan of action? To what extent are the proposers qualified? Okay, that's you. And then lastly, to what extent do you have sufficient access to resources? These are all facets of the intellectual merit criteria. So it's actually quite a broad criterion. It's not just the first one about advancing science. Yes?
What does it mean to be well qualified as a grad student?
Are you not well qualified as a graduate student, but well qualified to carry out the research? Okay, so if I put in a DDIG to do work on geography, I'm clearly not well qualified because I'm in the business. Yeah. Presumably, you're qualified if this is something you're proposing. But it doesn't hurt to stress that in the proposal. Broader impacts, this is the other review criteria, and this one is a little bit more nebulous. And this is something that's relatively recent. The broader impacts are, to what extent does the proposal do the following kinds of things? Promote teaching, training, and learning. Well, as a DDIG, it's clearly going to promote training because it's training, right? But does it do any of these other things? Does it promote teaching or learning? Does it promote the participation of underrepresented groups? Does it contain outreach activities to either the public or to K through 12 education? Does it enhance the infrastructure of your university or your department? Does it have broad dissemination of results? Does it have benefits to society? So, one second. Intellectual merit, we're all pretty comfortable with. Is this good science? For broader impacts, does the work matter to other people besides the people in the ivory tower? And this is something you shouldn't give short change to. As I said, it's a more recent NSF criteria. It's becoming more and more important. Okay, and whether or not your proposal has broader impacts may just make the difference between it being funded over something else.
The research that I'm going to do involves focus groups of underrepresented groups of people with that.
Absolutely, yeah. So you want to spin it that you're involving underrepresented groups in the research, and then if you have some way to give back to those communities after your research, that's a good thing to do. Any other questions about these two criteria? Okay, so here's the link for where you can go in NSF web world to find more about these two criteria. Okay, so that was the project summary. Any questions before I move on? Okay, so the main thing that you'll spend most of your time writing is the project description. The length of the project description varies from program to program, but it's typically 10 or 15 pages. Okay, so this is where you describe what you're going to do. All right, and I like to think of the project description having at least three main parts. One is the research question. Okay, the other is the implementation of you answering or investigating that question. And then the third is a discussion of the significance of the work. Okay, so within the research question, you want to do a number of things. At the least, you want to show that you've done your homework and you've looked at the literature, so you want to contextualize the question within the context of what other people have already done. Okay? Show that you've done your homework, so to speak, and you're linking up with existing research. Okay? The other thing you want to do is connect to the particular theory or theoretical framework that you're going to be working on. This will be familiar for most of you. You know what the theory or theories are in your field. Okay? But you want to set your research in that context. Not only in the context of the large literature, but in the context of a smaller theoretical framework. Because if you're going to approach the whole theory, chances are your proposal is going to be too broad. Okay, so that's the research question. Implementation, what you want to do here is give details about the project, what you're going to do, and its methodology. So you want to have a clear work plan, and you want to have a clear timeline. Okay? One of the things that often goes wrong in a dissertation proposal is that people haven't thought through carefully enough what they're actually going to do. It doesn't really fly to say, I'm going to collect data and analyze it. All right? Details, details, details on this implementation part of the project. What kind of data are you going to collect? How are you going to analyze it? Why is this the relevant data? And so on. Okay? And then lastly, the significance of the work. This goes back to the two merit criteria I was talking about. They're really getting at what is the significance of this work, both in terms of its intellectual contribution, but also in terms of its broader impact. And again, this is something I will freely admit to not thinking about too much with respect to my research. I get involved in the details and making sure I have all the pieces I need, and I forget to think about why would anybody else care about this? Not only my colleagues, but say my parents or the public. And it's really worth doing this at an early stage. If you can make your research relevant, you've sort of tapped into a successful funding career. Yes.
So how much saving the world should you be? I mean, like, should you put it in the, 8 billion people could be impacted by this
No, you want
pest
to be,
control, or?
you want to be realistic.
Uh-huh.
Okay, but you do want to give this some thought. Okay, what are the potential implications? Okay. Thought
So like
without-
how many people it would impact, or how it would include?
how it would impact them.
So more how, not how many.
Yeah, the how would be better. I mean, because if it impacted a lot of people, but minimally, that's not so interesting. It's how would it impact them? Okay, so these broader impacts that I talked about, they're getting a lot more play at NSF, and it's worth thinking about your research in this context. Okay, like I said, I'm as guilty as anyone in sort of narrowing in on the interesting linguistic details that nobody else would care about, and I forget to think, well, what should I do? What should other people be interested in? And so this is worth thinking about.
So you talk about broader impacts, and I know this is largely what we're talking about in social behavioral sciences, but I come from agricultural, kind of like hard sciences, is, you know, talking about participation of underrepresented groups and outreach activities and things like that, stuff we should focus on with hard sciences, or should we just kind of be straightforward like this?
The broader impacts is an NSF-wide thing.
Okay.
So the broader impacts will differ, and you don't try to make up broader impacts. So if you have no outreach component to your dissertation, don't make one up just to get one in here, but think about within what you plan to do, does it meet any of those criteria? Okay, so obviously agricultural will have impacts in other places. Everybody will have slightly different impacts. All right, this is a sort of a random list of tips that I threw together talking to people and looking at various materials on here. Right? Make your project hypothesis driven. Okay, like I said, it's great to go out and collect data, but you need to be addressing a research question or a hypothesis. Be clear, write in a simple style. Don't aggravate your reviewers by writing long sentences that they have to read twice to parse. As I said before, be specific. Be specific. Be specific. Give details. Show people you've really thought through the project. This one, be a little redundant, because these reviewers are going to be reading your proposal, but they may be reading 10 other proposals as well. So you may not have their 100% attention. So it doesn't hurt to repeat the important stuff more than once. And then again, as I was talking about before, think about the big picture. Think about these broader impacts. Okay? Not only for the broader impacts themselves, but to show the reviewer that you have thought about your research beyond the details, that you are ready to engage with science. More tips. If you're critiquing another hypothesis or research, be gentle, because you don't actually know who's going to read the proposal, and it may be them. Try to anticipate questions that a reviewer or an evaluator might ask. So after you're all done, put it aside and come back to it and try to read your proposal as a reviewer might, rather than as, let's say, you might. Get feedback from other people or other sources. That's always good. And then lastly, make sure your proposal is technically correct here. And by this I mean, have you crossed all your T's and dotted your I's, or the electronic equivalent? Make sure your proposal is formatted correctly. Make sure there are no typing errors and spelling errors and things like that. In the ideal world, that shouldn't influence reviewers in terms of the merit of your project, but in the real world, it does. A sloppy proposal makes people think that this is going to be sloppy research. Okay, so take some time to put the finishing touches on. Any questions about the project description? Okay, so the budget, let's move on to that. That's the third main one that you'll have to think about. Budget restrictions vary from program to program again. So again, check the program to see what the upper limit on your budget is. It's typically somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. When you're trying to figure out what to ask for what you need, not what you want. Okay? If you ask for what you want, chances they'll cut it down to only what you need. Okay? So ask for what you need to get the research done. As in other places in your budget, include details. Okay? What are you going to buy? What kind of databases do you need access to? Okay? Why are they important? Give the details. Give the real prices. Don't just guess that I'm going to travel to somewhere in Europe and it's going to cost roughly between $1,000 and $2,000. Just like any place else in the proposal, the details here will help if you have them. Okay. Don't inflate your budget. That should be obvious. The government, this money is your tax money, so you want to spend wisely, right? And then lastly, along with your budget, you'll have to write what's called a budget justification, which describes why you need all these individual things and what they cost. Okay, and you should put some time into that. Again, describe it in detail so that somebody sees that you thought about the material that you need and how much it's going to cost, or that what you're asking for is reasonable and going to be well spent. Yes.
Are there samples anywhere for what that should look like formatting wise?
Pardon?
Are there samples anywhere for what that should look like formatting
The
wise?
budget justification? No.
Or, I mean, the whole thing?
It runs the gamut. The budget, the NSF budget is arranged on a line by line thing, and so one thing you could do is just walk through the budget line by line explain.
Okay.
I think on the website, sorry, I think on the website there are examples. There's a few full examples
Oh,
of
good.
the whole DDIG.
All right, and this is the UF website?
No,
Or
this is
NSF.
in NSF.
Oh.
They have like a few, does
Yeah,
you also?
I believe-
Awesome.
I believe it.
They don't have them for all the directorates, but they have a few.
So like I said, NSF is huge, and there's way more out there than any one person could possibly do. All right, so that's a good thing. All right, some more budget tips, some examples of things that are good things to ask for. These are reasonable expenses. Data collection or survey costs, specialized research equipment that you specifically need and can't get at your university set. Costs related to field research away from UF. Okay, that would include lodging, living expenses, telephone card, so travel to various collections, those kinds of things. Things that aren't allowed are stipends or salaries for you or your advisor. Indirect costs, these are additional costs that the university charges to collect, basically overhead. Those aren't allowed on the dissertation grants. No publication costs related to the dissertation. And then except in unusual situations, you're not allowed costs related to a research assistant. Yes.
What about secondary data that exists but is costly? Is that a valid budget item?
If the,
Like for you to not actually collect the data, but let's say there's a database, but it just happens to be, I don't know, $5 grand.
absolutely,
That's
yeah, yeah.
valid, even though
Yes.
you're not actually collecting it?
Sure, yeah. Economics, I know in particular, a good portion of their funds go towards existing surveys and databases.
Does the amount of your proposed budget influence the likeliness that you receive an award?
No. No, the reviewers generally don't look at the budget at all.
If my research is in Appalachia, would it be ridiculous to ask for $5,000 to buy a car instead of renting a car? I mean, you know, if I'm coming to back
I
and
laugh
forth.
because you should only know how much discussion there has been about this. Yes, you can ask for that. Yeah, I mean, is it going to cost significantly less to buy one than to say rent one? Because that's an alternative. You just rent a car with one.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If you-
There's nothing that says you can't buy a car. There are technical issues about what happens to this car when you're done with the research, because the university owns it, and I don't think they want it sitting up on blocks on
Right.
scroll
I'll
blocks.
leave it up there.
But yeah, that's something you can ask.
How is, I guess, the money administered? I mean, if you say you're going to rent a car and they approve your budget, and then you find, oh, I can't purchase a car cheaper, is there anybody to say you can't do that, or do you have to get approval from the university for funds? Or I'm just thinking airline tickets, because prices change frequently also, and it's like you're probably not going to take the exact flight and price that was in your budget.
So you put in a budget, suppose your grant gets awarded. NSF gives the lump sum of that grant to the university, in this case UF. After that, NSF is out of the picture. It's up to UF how you spend. They can be audited, but it's not NSF that does the audit. It's the U.S. Government Inspector General. So after it leaves NSF, you need to spend it according to UF policy. So they may have a concern if you start buying things you didn't say you were going to buy, but you don't need to check with NSF. Does that answer your question?
I guess then the next question is, how does you administer that? But that's probably for somebody else.
Yeah, you need to talk to the person in DSR, whether they'll allow you to make changes, but NSF doesn't. All right, moving on, the biographical sketch. There's a very strict, precise format for a biographical sketch. It's 2 pages, and the various details are here at this website. Okay? So this is one of the places where there's not a whole lot of room for creativity. Give them what they want and don't give them what they don't want. Don't put in extra stuff. They want 10 publications, give them 10, don't give them more. Some programs require an initial statement about your status towards your degree, and if you're in one of those programs, the program specific statement say that. But otherwise, there's not a lot of two other things on that you'll need to submit. There's a form called Facilities, Equipment, and Other Resources. That is, you have access to particular equipment that you need, even computer equipment. Fill that out, even if your access to resources is minimal. Okay? And then there's a form called Current and Pending Support. Do you have any other grant proposals in anywhere, or do you have any current support already awarded? Fill that out too. All right? These have to be in there. This is just NSF government bureaucracy. In particular, for the current and pending support, as crazy as this might sound, the proposal that you are submitting needs to be listed as pending support. I didn't make that up, but it needs to be there. Okay, so one of the current and pending support proposals is the current one.
Just say that my advisor has, $1 million grant, $500,000,
Yeah.
that my project is under, and I'm applying for this so that I can supplement and, fund my stuff.
Yeah.
Should I say, oh, I also have a current, I'm under the aegis of my $500,000 contract with my advisor? And stuff, or?
If your advisor would be the PI on that grant, so he should submit it as current support. Okay, you need to submit current and pending support for both the PI and the co-PI, so that would be his current support. You may not have anything except for this one, which is pending. All right, does that make sense? Other supplementary documents. This is something that varies from program to program. So you need to contact your program officer or go to the program specific page and find out what's allowed, required, or prohibited. Here's some very general things of what might be allowed or not allowed. So yes, if you're doing some international collaboration, you want a letter indicating that they're willing to do the collaboration and they're willing to give you access to facilities. No additional materials like letters of recommendation, transcripts, appendices to your project description, or other things related to the project description. The project description has a page limit, 10 or 15 pages, and this is supplementary documents aren't a way to get around. Okay? And then maybe a statement from your department chair indicating your progress towards the degree. Again, this is project, this is program. And then I think this is the last one that I want to point out. And this is something people don't often see because it's buried at the bottom. There are these things called single copy documents that don't go to reviewers. Okay, all the stuff at the top goes to the reviewers who evaluate it. But under single copy documents, there's this thing that says list of suggested reviewers optional. And this is what you think it is. This is a get out of jail card, pretty basically. NSF is asking for you to suggest people to review your proposal. It sounds too good to be true, but it is for real. Okay? Who would be good out there in the field to give an honest evaluation of the research that you're proposing? Okay? So give them a list, give us some names, emails, and a sentence about why these people would be appropriate. And the only caveat is avoid people who have a conflict of interest with you or your advisor. Okay, so obviously you can't put your advisor, but don't put your advisor's friend or your advisor's wife or people in your department who know you really well. Okay, this is for real. Think about people who really would be good to evaluate your proposal. And give NSF a list, and chances are they'll use at least some people.
Those are people who are at NSF?
No, people in the community. Yeah. No, NSF, like I said, we're administrators. We don't actually in science. We just facilitate it. So these are people out in your scientific community that you think have the expertise to evaluate whether this is good research. So no reason not to take advantage of this. The worst that can happen is that they don't use the name you do. So,
do you know? Do you mean by community those who are qualified to review an NSF proposal?
right, that's what I mean.
Where can I find the list?
Well, a good place to start might be your bibliography. If you're citing somebody, if you're citing 6 works by somebody, chances are that
But
person.
I don't know if they would review for NSF.
So that doesn't matter. NSF will take care of it.
Oh,
So, but people you think who are qualified to evaluate the work. Okay, so by community I mean your researchers, people in your field. Yeah.
Does it matter if they're American? I mean,
No, anywhere across the world.
So,
Okay, anybody. If it's somebody who is on some mountaintop, you might want to give us an email address. People that you genuinely think are in a good position to evaluate the work and what you're going to do. Okay.
They might not know that the reviewers are all volunteers. It might be confusing.
Volunteers, well, they're volunteers in the way that their arms are sort of twisted. They're not paid, is that what you mean?
Correct, yes.
All right, I'll talk a little bit about the review process, and I'll tell you. Okay. And then lastly, as long as you're doing this grant proposal, here are some references, resources for the broader picture of how to put together a proposal, not just the DDIG, but other ones in general. Okay, and this is in the handout statement. Lots of useful tips beyond what I've said here. I've only skimmed the surface about what should be in the project description. All right, so here's the last part of the project, the whole shebang. What happens next? You've submitted your proposal. You push the button in Fastlane that says submit to sponsored research office, and they send it to NSF. It disappears and you don't hear about it for months. It goes into this black hole. What happens? Well, it enters the merit review process of NSF. Okay, so let me briefly, how much time do I have?
As long
You want
as you
me-
want to stay,
Oh,
I'll
okay.
stay.
All right. Let me just briefly give you an idea of what happens, what the merit review process is, so you have an idea of what happens to your proposal. And this might help you make sense of what you get back at the end, either way, whether it's funded or not. Particularly if it's not funded, you have an idea of why it wasn't funded and what the process was that came to them, that led to that. Okay, so like I said, what happens now is it enters the merit review process. And here are the steps. First of all, if you want more information on this review process, there's a link you can go to that describes it in more detail than I'm going to cover. But here are the basic ideas. So first of all, it comes into NSF, and we do our government bureaucracy thing. We check to make sure it's formatted right. You know, make sure that you submitted all the necessary documents. If you haven't submitted anything that you can't have, that it's formatted right, if the font's not too small, and so on and so on. Okay? That your project summary has both a paragraph on intellectual merit and broader impact. If it doesn't meet these criteria, it can be sent back. Okay? Program officers are nice people and they try not to do this, but if there's enough wrong with it, they can send it back. At the very least, if there's something wrong with it, you have to engage in a conversation with the program officer to fix it. It's going to delay the evaluation of your proposal. And so that's why I said at the very end to make sure your proposal is technically correct, because it'll speed up the evaluation. And so that's the first thing. All right, so suppose that your proposal now passes this, what's called compliance check. Then reviewers are assigned to the proposal. These may be reviewers that you suggested or ones that the program officer can. Okay. So as Beth said, these are volunteers. These are people we write to, we say something to the effect of, based on your expertise, we are asking you to evaluate the following doctoral dissertation research improvement grant proposal. Okay. And these people will either come back with nothing, I'd be happy to, or more likely, oh, I have so much to do, but I think I can fit this in. All right, and they promise to return a review within. Typical time frame is a month. Okay. And again, what they're asked to comment specifically on in their review is the intellectual merit of your proposal, the broader impacts, and then anything else they'd like to say about it. Okay, so I keep coming back to this intellectual merit and broader impacts because that's sort of the core of this whole thing. That's why you want to address it in the proposal, because that's what the reviewers are asked to address. Okay, so reviewers are assigned to the proposal, and they evaluate it with respect to these two criteria. All right, the reviews come back. The program officer typically convenes what's called an advisory panel. This is a group of experts in the field, in my case, a bunch of linguists, and they evaluate the proposals, the various reviews, and the other proposals. Okay, so they're not just looking at one proposal, they're looking at all the proposals that came in for that particular. And this advisory panel does what their name suggests. They make recommendations to the program officer about which proposals they think should be funded, or more neutrally, which proposals are most competitive. Okay, and their recommendations are based on their own opinions, okay, their collective opinions, the opinions of the reviewers. Absent from that is the program officers. We're not really there to give our opinion, we're there to facilitate them giving us theirs. So that's what the advisory panel does. And then lastly, the program officer takes all this information, the reviews, the panel recommendation, the availability of funds, a whole bunch of other things, and makes actual decisions on what to fund or not. Okay. So what weighs most heavily clearly is the reviews, okay, because they're evaluating the work and whether it's good science. But after that, there are a number of other considerations that do play. Questions? That's the review process in a nutshell.
I have a question. I had submitted a proposal before and I got some feedback from reviewers. So, and I need to address those comments. And when I resubmit my proposal, are the reviewers this round with the same reviewers as the last round?
That's
or
a good
do
question.
you have to form a new advisory panel?
Right, so one outcome from this review process is that the program officer decides not to fund your proposal, and you get it back. And what you'll do is you'll get the proposal back, of course, and you'll get the reviews, and you'll get what's called a panel summary. That is a sort of miniature review from the advisory panel. And what you want to do if you decide to resubmit is you want to change your proposal and address the specific comments in the review. So the question is, what happens if you submit it a second time? Who does it go to? Well, typically it goes to some of the same reviewers, and it'll go to some new people. So it doesn't always go just to the same people again. And the reasons for that are many. It may be that those same people don't have time to review it again. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they may just not have time to review it a second time. Okay, so it'll typically go to some same people and some. At the very end of the proposal, the process, you should probably hear something within 4 or 5 months. Okay, if you don't hear something within 5, you should write to your program officer and ask what's done. If you need to know sooner, you can write to them and say, have you made a decision yet? And the worst that they can say is, no, we haven't made a decision. Within SBE, the funding rate for these dissertation proposals varies between 15 and 50%, but for most of the programs, it's more like 20 to 40. Okay, so that gives you a sense of how competitive these are. They're not as competitive as a regular research proposal where funding rates are likely under 20 and sometimes under 10%. Any questions about the review process before I say just a couple more things? Okay. So let me just comment briefly about main reasons why proposals get declined. And broadly speaking, there are 3 of them. Here. So one is that the proposal fails to establish a theoretical framework, or it's poorly related to the relevant literature. That is, you don't engage the other science besides what you're doing. That's one problem that arises frequently. Another problem that arises frequently is that the proposal doesn't specify in enough detail the research methods and the methodology. Okay? Either it doesn't specify them specifically, or it does, and they turn out to be flawed in the review of science. And then the third reason that proposals actually get declined is that they do both of those things, but those things don't quite link up. That is, they've done a good literature search and they specify clear methods, but the methods aren't answering the research question. Okay, so there's a kind of disconnect. And that happens more often than you might know. So that's in a very broad view, the major concerns that lead to a decline. By and large, if you can do these 2 things and link them up, you should have a successful proposal. No guarantee. All right, thank you. That's all I have.
I've got So there's a registration list, because we're going to form an email group if anyone has questions. I'm sure I'm going to be able to ask Eric to respond to those questions, and then we can send the answers out. If you get into the proposal and you're writing and you need help, you can send me a question, and I'll get the answer and broadcast it to everyone. I wanted to show you where all of this information will reside for you. So here's the home page of the libraries. You're going to click on Using the Library. libraries. It's the blue link here, and you go to grant resources, okay? Just to make sure you know how to find it. Now, this is the page that I manage with my student Suchi, who's in the back filming the entire program today. So you click on workshops on the left side, and that brings you to all the workshops that we've done since I've been here. Actually, we started in November. We've done a lot of workshops. And here is Dr. Potsdam's workshop right here. It gives you the slides. We're going to post a video of this workshop, and he also recommended 2 of the sample proposals. And here's the live links to each one of the proposals that we have put up here for you. So you'll be able to look through those. Let me see if there's a budget connected to these. No. I have another sample that does have a budget attached to it from the previous workshop, but I have to get permission actually to send it out to you or to post it. The other dissertation DDIG workshop we did is right here, and there's other resources here that you can click on that will help you as well. The only other thing I would add is that you will probably need a DSR-1 form, and your professor will know what that is in order to submit your proposal to DSR. So that was just the one thing I think that you have to, if you want to set up an account in the university system for grants, you have to have a DSR-1 form. And your professor will know how to get there. And if you have a question about where it is, I can show you where it is at another time. But we've gone over time. Is this good? Was this helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks to Dr.